The war in Ukraine has increased risks to the global economic outlook, according to the International Monetary Fund. It's warning of a trade-off between tackling inflation and safeguarding the post-pandemic recovery at a time of heightened geopolitical uncertainty.
In its half-yearly update, the IMF said prospects had worsened significantly in the past 3 months as it cut its growth estimate for 2022 from 4.4% to 3.6%. Our business correspondent Juliet Mann is here. Juliet.
Thank you. I'd just like you to rewind a little bit to the start of the year, because what was happening then was the pandemic was slowly being brought under control around the world and the global economy was recovering. Financial markets were zoning in on inflation, especially concerns about a possible slowdown in China. And then came Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The IMF says the war raises immediate financial stability risks and questions about the longer-term impact on markets. Now, these, say the IMF, are exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. The large number of firms withdrawing, scaling back or suspending business in Russia. The sharp rise in commodity prices adding to pre-existing inflationary pressures. Financial conditions are tightening, notably in Europe, the Middle East and Asia, where there are countries with close ties to Russia, reflecting lower equity valuations and higher funding costs, which in emerging markets have been pushed well above pre-pandemic levels for many borrowers. And energy and food security concerns may put climate transition efforts at risk. Now, to be clear, and not at all to underestimate the devastation and human impact, but at this point, the IMF says the war is not manifesting as a global systemic event from a financial standpoint. But, as we've outlined, it is expected to have a material impact. Well, let's talk to the author of the Financial Stability Report, IMF Deputy Director for the Monetary and Capital Markets Department, Fabio Natalucci. Thanks ever so much for coming on the programme. Look, in terms of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and associated sanctions, what structural issues do policymakers really need to confront?
So first of all, thank you for having me on your program. So there are both immediate threat to financial stability, and we walk through some of the risks, including inflation, tightening of financial condition, propagation channel. But then there are also some structural issues that policymakers will need to confront in coming years. Those include, for example, the rapidly changing trade-off between energy security and energy transition. So the possibility that energy transition may be put at risk, and we know that climate change is a risk to financial stability. There are also discussions about the role of the dollar in the future, whether the dollar will be threatened by other currency in terms of reserve allocation and, broadly speaking, asset allocation. Or other issues that, or risks that policymakers will need to confront are, for example, risk of fragmentation of global capital markets, including fragmentation of payment system. With, for example, the creation of central bank digital currency block. Now, we know that there are synergies from every global payment system and global capital markets, efficiency benefits as well as inclusion. So fragmentation block into the block could be a risk, I think, to the future. Then there are also issues related to cyber that needs to be dealt with, as well as possible cryptoization. So we mean the use of cryptos by emerging markets that would pose challenges to policymakers.
So
those are not immediate threats to financial stability.
Yeah. So not immediate threats to financial stability, but it's all building up, like you say. Look, you mentioned central banks. I'd like to bring in that sharp rise in commodities prices. How does that challenge the trade-offs for central banks?
Right, so central banks were already facing a trade-off going into the year. So the big macro theme going into 2022 was rising inflationary pressure, and now central bank would react. We have seen Bank of England that already started normalizing policy last year. The Fed pivot and was on its way. The ECB is also slowing the asset purchases. So additional pressure coming out from commodities markets, rising energy, food, and that makes the trade-off that central bank face between controlling inflation, bringing inflation credibly back to target, while at the same time ensuring the recovery of the global economy, avoiding a tightening of financial conditions, more difficult. So to do that, they need to decisively tackle inflationary pressure to avoid credibility damages, and they need to do it credibly, with clear language, as well as also be nimble, so able to adapt to changing economic conditions.
So being nimble is important. And Fabio, where do you see the financial vulnerabilities in China?
So in China, we see now the confluence of factors. One is the resurgence of COVID cases, and we have seen how the lockdown policy the Chinese authorities have responded to that. They seem to be having an impact in terms of economic activity, mobility, and possibly on supply chain. There's also other issues that where the stock market was already declining, for example, on uncertainty about regulatory policies, as well as the ongoing and intensifying pressure in the property developer sector. So we have seen a tightening of condition there. The risk is that there might be contagion beyond that specific sector to the broader real estate market, declining equity home prices, declining home sales, to the broader economy, local governments, possibly to corporates and banks. And that combination of the different sectors, the macro financial loop, feedback loop, I think that's what we are worried in terms of transition channel. Now, of course, they have taken measures to address some of these issues. And so we salute those measures. And this measure need to include both monetary policy as well as fiscal policy, particularly at the central level, as well as financial policies.
OK, so you salute what they do so far. Fabio, Natalucci, thank you very much indeed. And of course, I'll let you get back now to your spring meetings, the big spring meetings taking place in DC, Jamie and Robin.